everybody. I am Dr. Amy Nelson, and I am a naturopathic doctor, and I work here in Austin, Texas. And today I thought we would talk about the difference between adrenal fatigued and being menopausal or perimenopausal. So it's kind of a hormonal topic, and I wanted to kind of help illustrate that because when we go through menopausal changes, we really do need strong adrenal support and thyroid support. So today we're going to focus on the idea of what adrenal fatigue is and how it impacts menopause so that you can understand how to fix this or how to help yourself, right? Let's talk about what menopause means and what perimenopause means, right? So as we kind of roll into kind of like our mid to late 40s, the average age of menopause is 52. And so as we roll into these timeframes, you know, our ovaries stop producing, eggs, right? So we stop ovulating. And so that means that our pituitary, our hypothalamus and our pituitary and our ovaries kind of change, right? Change the messaging. So the secondary place in your body, though, that does secrete testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are your adrenal glands. So you have one on each kidney. They're on top of the kidney. They're the little gland that also secretes adrenaline. So there's various functions of the adrenal glands. Hormonal stabilization is one of the functions. So we don't necessarily think about this as we go into menopause or what's called perimenopause, meaning the years kind of leading up to menopausal changes. Menopause is definitely 2 years without a period. You are in menopause. Now, have I had it where women have been adrenal fatigued and we work on the adrenal system and they get their period back? Yeah. But do know this, like if you were 2 years without menses and then you started bleeding again, you have to get to the OB-GYN, right? Because if you were in what you thought was menopause and then you started having any kind of sign of bleeding or sign that you had your period back, you got to go get checked out for certain cancers, actually. Endometrial cancer or uterine cancers or things like that are very important to have that ruled out, But in this case, we're going to say that usually if we've got kind of like an adrenal fatigue, meaning cortisol kind of shuts its own production down. And what do I mean by all this? Let's show you this. This is basically a kind of a little snapshot of how your hormones kind of convert. And so here, let's see if I can kind of just do this. This might be easier. Yeah. So right here, we've got, cortisol, which actually vitamin D is a template for cortisol here. So we've got cortisol is the steroid template for pregnenolone and DHEA. Pregnenolone and DHEA are two little kind of precursor hormones. Here we've got the precursor to progesterone. Progesterone has two fates, aldosterone or cortisol. Well, three fates. It can actually transfer down here to E1. So we've got cortisol, right? So cortisol is a stress hormone. It wakes you up in the morning, and as it decreases throughout the day, you should feel tired and go to bed. But cortisol also will be stress city. If you have like major issues going on, maybe some family issues, work issues, whatever, some worries and sympathetic overdrive is part of a stress response in the body. So cortisol will elevate. And so guess what cortisol does? It depletes the progesterone, which also can deplete even the pregnenolone. So when you test the hormones, you kind of want to test the whole shebang. Maybe you don't test this one, but you'll test cortisol, pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA. You can actually test all of these metabolites here. So a lot of times you will see cortisol is kind of like been in a chronic state of stress, right? So when that happens, then we'll see this pregnenolone decrease. We call that pregnenolone steal. So what happens when all of that is low, then here, what do we have? Low DHEA, low estrogen, low testosterone, and low estradiol, right? So you might actually go into testing, and usually you'll do this through a urinary or salivary test. Blood tests can do this, but your more sensitive tests are actually urinary or salivary testing with cortisol and the free hormones. So here, what happens is that we've had actually an adrenal fatigue that shut the hormone production down off the adrenal glands. So that means that now I'm rolling into, like, say, my mid to late 40s, and then we're having some stabilization issues with the hormones. Maybe we have hot flashes, night sweats, inability to sleep. Maybe we have mood irregularities. the period may or may not be irregular, right? So then, when we test the hormones and we see the adrenal fatigue is kind of the underlying notion to all of this, then we want to make sure not to tell her you're in perimenopause, because, okay, what does perimenopause even mean? Anytime before menopause, okay? And it doesn't tell you a whole lot, right? You kind of already know that. You're in perimenopause because you're 45, or 42, or sometimes I feel like this gets like told to women as a dismiss kind of idea, because I've had women in their 30s get told they were in perimenopause. And I'm like, yeah, but did they test the adrenals? And usually, like, you have to go to a functional medicine doctor or somebody who is trained in that notion in order to have that it's not a standard workup, right? So it would get kind of labeled as perimenopause, and then with or without the ideas of support with it. So hormone replacement therapy is kind of a supportive thing. It depends on what level of adrenal fatigue we've got. I like to work with herbs and the hormone precursors first. And then if we needed to, then I send you on to the medical doctor to work with hormone replacement therapy, which is totally fine, but you'll try to see, you'll talk to your person and see what kind of symptoms they're having. You're also gonna do some testing to see kind of what levels of adrenal fatigue we have. There's adrenal fatigue that just affects the cortisol rhythm. There's adrenal fatigue that affects the cortisol rhythm and the hormonal rhythm. And then there's like next level. So you can tell that it kind of affected the pituitary. And that has to do with, like, let's say cortisol is low, progesterone's low, but estrogen and testosterone are fine. That might be kind of like a middle of the road, or what we call category 2 adrenal fatigue. But if the DHEA and the pregnenolone are low, and we have ovulation issues, then that's stage 3, right? So you want to kind of see this dynamic, because this could be going on with fertility too. So your fertility person, you're going to also kind of understand that. So like in a 27-year-old who's having trouble maybe getting pregnant, you will run the same kind of dynamic, right? Because you want to see what role the adrenal system had on that hormone dynamic. Now, in a 47-year-old, also who's trying to get pregnant, that's the same fertility story, right? But let's say you're having fatigue, or your brain fog, or maybe there's hot flashes, night sweats. You're going to try to understand how the adrenals are acting, because they're a huge dynamic with the balance of that system. And then knowing that when you go into menopause, you have to have strong thyroid and strong adrenals, because women will have a weight adaptation, a metabolic adaptation. The feedback loop to the cortisol is actually pretty important to know that, because sometimes, like, if the thyroid looks fine, but we don't know what the adrenals are doing, somebody still may be exhausted and having a hard time losing weight. That tells us that the adrenal system is probably having a feedback loop in there. Because remember, the adrenals and the thyroid are really good at keeping a metabolic state for you. So rolling into hormonal changes, if those two organ systems are kind of imbalanced or kind of taxed or working overtime, we roll into that change with some metabolic shifts that are hard. And then of course women get told, oh, exercise more, eat less. Well, what's that going to do to the thyroid? Now the body really thinks you're starving. And the adrenals too. Now you're probably going to drive in some hypothyroid challenges, because the body is like, I knew it. You're starving. And because you're rolling into this with probably too much stress that you've been through, right? Every so often somebody's like, no, I'm cool, and maybe their adrenals are okay, but stress can also just be like, I just have too much to do today, and I've been working too hard, too busy for too long, not enough break. I mean, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of reasons to have the cortisol levels be off, even chronic infection, right? So maybe it's not stress, but it's maybe the body's internal stress with either the inflammation or leaky gut or any of that. So if somebody's mentally not stressed out, totally okay, but maybe the stress is coming from leaky gut syndrome, or maybe they've got, some of these chronic viral infections will definitely create adrenal fatigue. So you definitely want to get that worked on and get that figured out. And then, like, understand your hormonal shifting, right? The menopausal or perimenopausal situation. Because if you just look at it like a menopausal, then it's very dismissive. You see how that's quite dismissive? You want to know, what is my thyroid doing? Maybe next time we can, or sorry, what are my adrenals doing? Maybe next time we can talk about how the thyroid should be strong going into this change. Today can be the adrenal system being strong. Next week we can talk about the thyroid being strong. So, point being, thyroid and adrenals need to be very strong going into these menopausal shifts. How do you get these tested? Well, you can do, like we talked about earlier, a salivary panel. A couple different providers, there's ZRT, there's diagnostics. I think Vibrant Wellness has one where you spit in tubes and then you send it to the lab. So usually you get a kit. And you usually, like I said, have to go to a functional medicine doctor or a naturopathic doctor to work with that. Your regular OB-GYN probably doesn't do this very often, or unless they're specially trained as a functional OB-GYN. So like, you could ask your doctor, and if they say, never heard of that, it's okay. It's okay to not hear of everything, right? So then okay, I got to go to a functional medicine specialist or a naturopathic doctor. So you would spit in tubes, you send it to the lab. Usually it's called a 4-point cortisol curve. So you want throughout the day, like, yes, there's a 24-hour cortisol that your doctor can order, and there's also like a first morning cortisol. It's usually a blood test that they can order. Not the most sensitive for that diurnal rhythm, right? The 24-hour one would just kind of tell you if you've got a disorder with the adrenals. So you want that, like, morning, then usually about a half hour later, then it's usually mid-afternoon, and then it's right before bed. Usually you want that curve, right? Now your cortisol is highest in the morning, it comes up a little bit, and then it slowly goes down throughout the day. So you can kind of tell on the curve if it's low. So if it's below everything, that means cortisol shut itself down, and now you're living in a hypothyroid or hypoadrenal, we'll call it functional adrenal fatigue, right? Now, sometimes it's low and high. That person's kind of dealing with probably some stress dynamics. Sometimes it's just straight up high, and they are probably just going through something, right? So you'll see these different dynamics. You fix them in different ways. So you don't just throw adrenal support for everyone. You don't have the same adrenal support that you're going to give to each person, because each one of those acts differently, right? So you should be familiar with as a practitioner, you have lots of different adrenal herbs that you're going to know about. Schizandra, holy basil, ashwagandha, rhodiola, glycyrrhiza. I know there's many. There's a lot more than that, but like a lot of those adaptogenic herbs are actually going to kind of put the adrenal system in place again. How do you know which one to give? You have to talk to your person and see if they have other things going on. Sometimes if they've got other underlying anxiety or thyroid issues, you'll pick your herbs differently, okay? You can do a glandular. So sometimes there's a glandular support that goes on. So a glandular, think of, what do you call it? Armor thyroid is a glandular that has a T3, T4 extract that comes from a cow, right? Well, you can give glandulars that come from cows, and they are extracts that can be with these adaptogenic herbs. So you'll give that in cases where there's a lot more probably fatigue going on. So yeah, you'll have different glandulars that are going to go on there. Sometimes you'll do both. You'll go back to the vitamins. Vitamin C is really needed. Methylated B, that's going to be your methylcobalamin, your methyl B12. Those are really needed by the adrenal system. You could give then the the hormone precursors, so pregnenolone and DHEA. So those are two things that you would give to kind of stimulate the production of the hormone. If that isn't helping, then yes, it's time for hormone replacement therapy. That is totally okay. And I really like the bioidentical hormones. I think they play well in the body. If you're getting testosterone, whether you're male or female, you always have to have your CBC run, right? So testosterone will go to the kidney and say release erythropoietin. That's the hormone that is used for red cell production. So on anybody taking a testosterone prescription, you have to run CBCs to make sure they're not producing too much hemoglobin. Okay, and so if the red cell count is up and the hematocrit and hemoglobin levels are up, that's too much red blood cell. That's too much, right? So you have the same risk factors for oxidative stress as somebody who has diabetes. So that's your cardiovascular issue, that's potentially a stroke, heart attack kind of stuff. So you really want to watch your testosterone people to make sure that they're not getting too much testosterone. And yes, that can happen. So testosterone, remember, converts to estradiol and it converts to dihydrotestosterone. So if you have especially a man who's getting testosterone and his hair is falling out and he's got too much red cell, that's definitely a signal that you're taking way too much testosterone and you need to go back to that provider and talk with them about lowering the dose or taking it 3 times a week versus daily or whatever. So you have to definitely, retest the hormones to make sure that they're in balance, and your provider, can do that. So, let's see here. So you might not be in menopause, you might be in adrenal fatigue. So know that. Or of course you could be in both. You have to have strong adrenals and strong thyroid to go through hormonal changes. And, we're talking about this with women, because men don't go through menopause, but men go through menopause. There's kind of this idea of andropause, right? So men don't cycle, right? But they do have the same story with their low testosterone. Low testosterone is always adrenal fatigue. So you're going to chase down what is the adrenal system doing, because you want to balance that situation out rather than just throw hormone replacement therapy at it. And then, like I just mentioned, so if a man has risk factors for heart attack and you just gave him testosterone and his red blood cell and hematocrit went up, and he has a family history of heart disease, you better watch that. You better figure that you better be checking that CBC all the time. And I like actually using different herbal formulas. There's actually different herbal formulas with ashwagandha and actually some Chinese herbs that work really, really well for balancing out the testosterone without having that weird hormonal conversion, but also without having the effect on the cardiovascular, right? So just know that there's different ways to solve this problem. And I guess some habits we can talk about with cortisol is don't burn the candle at both ends. Get yourself some boundaries. Stay away from toxicity, like people. No, not just toxic environment, but, have some good boundaries going on with stuff in your life. Work on your issues, bring joy and happiness into your life. That's always good. Sleep 8 hours, which means go to bed on time. So sometimes it's just going to bed at 10 o'clock versus 11 o'clock. We talk about needing, 7.5 hours as the bare minimum for sleep. So when you do that, you can get that rhythm going for your adrenal glands and for your nervous system and for your brain. And then guess what? You have growth hormone that secretes at night. That's important for metabolism. It's important for tissue healing. You don't do that if you sleep 6 hours. So if you're somebody who says, I sleep 6 hours, which is totally what I can live on, you're kind of lying to yourself. I hate to break it to you, but you do need 7.5 to probably 8 hours of sleep, and you need to sleep well. So it could be getting those habits in play. I always sleep better when I exercise. So that's also something, so exercise, putting that in place. That's definitely good for the adrenal system. It's good for the nervous system. Now, if you're adrenal fatigue and thyroid fatigue, I always tell this to people too, if you exercise and you I need a nap. Oh my gosh, I just exercised and I can't handle it. You need to exercise differently, so HIIT training, high intensity interval, is really good for restoring the adrenals, restoring the thyroid. So you wouldn't go I'm going to go run 3 miles or run 5 miles or whatever it is. You don't want to do that kind of pushing yourself to the limit. You want to do HIIT training. Muscle building is also great for the system, so you can just, You know, I told somebody this morning, I said, you need to become a bodybuilder. And she and I just laughed. And I'm like, well, I mean, you know, in your world, you know, and I love that body pump class by the YMCA. You know, anything to strength train, right? Women especially, yeah, we got to be putting on muscle in our 40s, like push-ups. We got to do a push-up and do a push-up in a way that's like, you know, work toward an honest to God push-up. I like, yeah, I remember at the YMCA when I was doing body pump and I had to do the tricep dip. Oh my God, I couldn't even do it. I went down on my, you know, I like did the tricep dip, but I could not do one. I was like, I don't think I have any triceps. Was I born without them? You know, and so eventually now I do triceps all the time because, you know, I like to do, like, if I'm in the kitchen and I'm cooking, I'll do some like push-ups on the countertop, like at an incline, and then I'll do some tricep dips like that too. So I just throw a few of them in there when I'm trying to, you know, not burn something in the kitchen. Anyway, so getting into a habit of strength training and getting some muscle building going is going to be great for you in lots of ways. But, you know, today we're just going to consider, like, you really have to have good, you know, adrenal workup to understand these hormonal changes. So if you do have a hormonal change, whether you're a man or female, then work up your adrenals, you know, and have that either a salivary or a urinary adrenal test done. That's usually, excuse me, that's really good. What else? Yeah, next week, let's talk about the thyroid's role in all this. Because, yeah, that's a thing. So, anyway, hope you guys are okay, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.